Hi, so my name is Muqeet Ali, and I will be talking about scalable malware clustering. So basically, I am part of advanced security research team, which is based in Austin, Texas, USA, and I've been working on scaling some clustering techniques so that we can scale to large number of items and um, apply that to cluster malware effectively. So let's talk about some background details in this regard. Um, so basically, the techniques that I will discuss, they rely on similarity hashing techniques. So what are similarity hashing? I'm hopeful that you guys have heard the talk from Josiah Hagan, which kind of compares different similarity hashing techniques. So my work kind of builds on similarity hashing techniques. I kind of use that to build scalable clustering techniques. Just to explain again, so similarity hashing aims to produce similar hash output for similar looking inputs. So you guys probably are familiar with standard crypto hashes like SHA-256 and MD5. So the problem with these hashes is that changing a few bits or bytes just changes the output completely. So that's something we don't want in a similarity hash. So the characteristic of a similarity hash is that you change a few bytes, the output doesn't change by a lot. So similar looking input will produce similar looking output. So the uses of that are in blacklisting or whitelisting. So imagine a blacklisting application where you wanna blacklist items based on known malware items. So the way you can use similarity hash is that all the malware which is related to known malware would also be blocked. And you can apply the same technique to build an effective whitelist approach. So this work will mainly focus on TLSH, which has been shown to be particularly good at detecting variants of malware. So next up, I will talk about searching and clustering. So I believe that searching and clustering are the two important tools available to security analysts because the volume of items available out there in the wild is increasing day by day. So there are millions, even billions of items out there in the wild, and a security analyst cannot make sense of them in a reasonable amount of time. So that's why I believe that searching and clustering based on TLSH digest is a very useful tool. So if you have a given known malware sample and you wanna know that what are the related malware samples to the given sample, then you're gonna make use of these techniques, searching and clustering. Clustering in particular would help the analyst in studying like related threats or related malware samples, and that can further help the analyst in building useful defenses. Um, one thing related to clustering is that the clustering quality produced by the clustering algorithm that needs to be of good quality, because if the clustering quality is of not good quality, then our analyst is just sifting through a vast amount of data with a lot of false positives. So that creates a lot of fatigue for the analyst, and they will lose hope on the clustering or searching techniques. So in order for the clustering technique to be useful, it has to produce clustering of very good quality. The other thing about related to clustering is that it ought to be able to scale to large number of samples and also consume reasonable amount of resources. A clustering that cannot scale in a reasonable amount of time to millions of samples would simply be not practical enough. And the other thing we want to be careful about is how many resources the clustering technique is consuming. So those are the kind of challenges that I'm looking to address in this work. So there's some previous work that I did with colleagues here at Trend Micro. So we published a paper recently in IEEE Coins. It's called Hacked in Fast Search with Similarity and Security. So what we showed in this paper is that we can build a fast search index and that can do clustering of TLS hashes in log n time. So we also showed in the paper that it contains an evaluation of tens of millions of samples, and we can cluster tens of millions in a matter of hours, as opposed to days. So the clustering technique was based on vantage point trees for exact solution or forest-based index for an approximation. So more details I'm leaving out. You guys can check out the paper, and if you have any questions, you can email me. So I've kind of focused on what I'll be talking mainly about in this talk. So that is scalable malware clustering. So I want to scale it to even larger data size than what we have done previously. That's the focus of my current work. So one disadvantage with previous approach was that the approach we presented earlier in IEEE Coins, that was limited to a single machine. So if you want to scale to 1 billion items, we cannot effectively search and cluster 1 billion items in a single machine because it has its limitations of physical hardware, RAM, disk storage, etc. So we wanted a solution which can scale to multiple machines and cores. And so in particular, the goals of the clustering mechanism were scalability. It ought to be highly scalable because we are dealing with millions of items at least. So we want to be able to cluster in a reasonable amount of time. And this second constraint we had was the cluster quality. So in order for the clustering algorithm to be useful for the analyst, the clustering quality has to be quite good. And the third goal was if you could optimize on the resources utilized, like number of machines, compute time, that would really help us actually deploy the clustering mechanisms in practice. So next up, I will just briefly discuss our data collection. So we have sourced our data from VirusTotal. And in this study, I focused mainly on the P files, but we have plans to expand that to other types of file like HTML or ELF. So I looked at 5 different AV vendors, Kaspersky, Microsoft, Symantec, Sophos, and McAfee. And so the way it works is that I extracted labels from the scan of 5 major AV vendors, and those labels actually represent whether the particular file was detected as malware or not by the respective AV vendors. And then I use those labels to kind of calculate the clustering quality, and more on that I will talk about later section. So I compute the standard TLSH hash. So TLSH hash will be used as a feature in our clustering algorithms. So the data collection makes use of AWS batch. So one problem we encountered with collecting VirusTotal feeds was that the load varies quite a lot. So by making use of a static allocation of resources, we will end up wasting a lot of resources. So we moved to AWS batch, so that allows for dynamic scaling and good coverage. So we ended up with 99.9% coverage, and the cost was also reasonable. We are like spending like less than $1,000 on that per month. So now I'll talk about comparison of clustering techniques. So before I kind of delve on like my approach to the problem, clustering TLS hashes, so I want to briefly discuss what is out there in the wild. So why could not we make use of existing clustering techniques to solve this problem, right? So we looked at various clustering techniques which are available in the wild, like k-means, k-medoid-based approaches, as well as density-based approaches like dbScan. So, so one problem with k-means, k-medoid-based approaches is that you have to know k in advance. Like before you run the algorithm, you have to know that how many clusterings you are desired. So that's very hard to know in a security context, because you really don't know like how many threats are out there, for example, or how many different clusterings are out there. So of harmful samples are out there. So so that's a basic disadvantage with using k-means, k-medoid. But there are other disadvantages. Like I found that the clustering quality when using k-means, k-medoid was not very good. On the other hand, with approaches like dbScan, I found that the clustering quality is good, much better as compared to k-means, k-medoid, but the problem is that it's not scalable enough. So we concluded that previous approaches are not suitable for clustering TLS hashes, as either they are not scalable, like in the case of k-means, k-medoid, or they produce clusters which are not good quality, like in the case of dbScan. So what I also found was that k-means is a fast clustering method. So that kind of give an idea like, can we combine a fast clustering method like k-means with some other method which gives good clustering quality. So we ended up like devising a technique where we use k-means as a pre-processing step to produce coarse level clusters. And then as a second step, we make use of our early work, which is a hacked clustering mechanism to run it on the coarse level clusters and then produce the final cluster. So I'll elaborate on more on that in the next slides. But in order to use k-means, we need to like adapt it so that it can be made applicable to the TLSH hashes world. What I mean by that is that standard k-means cannot be applied as such to TLS hashes, because remember that TLS hashes make use of TLSH distance between as a distance between two TLS hashes. But k-means it uses Euclidean coordinates and Euclidean distance. So, and its proof of convergence kind of relies on this notion that it uses Euclidean distance. So, the long story short, when you use standard k-means for our purposes, the problem is that there is no guarantee that the k-means will give good performance, or either it will, or whether it will converge or not. There is no guarantee on that. So we ended up kind of adapting k-means for our purpose. So the way we go about doing that is that we used a standard TLS hash, which is 70 characters. So we convert that to a vector, which is 70 character long. And then we compute the mean of the vectors, and we call that n. In the second step, we find the TLS hash item which closest to m. But here we make use of the TLSH distance instead of the Euclidean distance. So the item in the third step, the item found will be used as the mean, and the rest of the algorithm proceeds routinely. Note that the convergence of the algorithm is not guaranteed. So we make use of max iterations, 10. So what that means is that we'll run 10 iterations of the k-means algorithm, and then we will terminate. So now more about the stage clustering overview. So as I explained earlier, we'll use k-means as a pre-processing step. So what that means is that I'll run k-means on the input data. So that will give me some, let's suppose I run k-means on 100. So I'll get 100 course level clusters. So these clusters, they are not at this point useful for the security analyst because they don't give good cluster quality. But I can feed them to a better, more expensive clustering algorithm like hacked clustering mechanism. And in the second step, I can run hacked clustering in parallel on all the course level clusters. So that's the little trick that I use here. So two-stage clustering will use k-means in the first step to produce course level clusters. And the second stage, hacked clustering, is used on each of the clusters obtained from first stage to obtain final clusters. Note that second stage can be done in parallel. Similar idea can be used to extend two-stage clustering to three-stage clustering. So I'll illustrate more with this diagram. So we have in this diagram an initial data set. So what we do is we run k-means on this input data set with, let's say, k is equal to 4. So what that means is at the end of this stage, you will have 4 clustering. So I label that C11, C12, C13, and C14 in the diagram. So now you have these 4 course level clusters. So in the three-stage clustering, what we do is we run k-means one more time. So we run k-means on each of these clusters with parameter k is equal to 2. So what will happen now is that for each of those clusters, you will end up, because you're running with k-means again, with k is equal to 2, there will be a further division. So each cluster will give rise to 2 more clusters. So in this particular example, we end up with 8 clusters after the second stage. So now we have the final stage, and in the final stage, we make use of hacked clustering algorithm, which is the more expensive clustering algorithm, but it actually produces good cluster quality. So that is why we save it for the very last stage. So note that for both stage 2 and stage 3, we can, like for stage 2, we can run k-means in parallel. And also for stage 3, we'll run our hacked clustering algorithm in parallel. So that saves, that speeds up the whole clustering mechanism. And as I will show later through numbers also. So evaluation metric, as I previously explained, that the cluster quality is of very much importance because we want to reduce the false positives and we want to reduce the fatigue that is incurred on the security analysts. So how do we actually evaluate the cluster quality? So because we are dealing with large number of samples, the evaluating cluster quality itself becomes a challenging problem because the well-known cluster quality metrics like Silhouette coefficient, they are simply not scalable enough because they themselves run quadratic time to compute. So we did some research here and we found a cluster quality metric called purity, which actually scales linearly. And purity is easy to understand. So the way it actually is computed is you look at the majority class label within each cluster and you sum that up over all the clusters and divide by the total number of samples. So purity varies from 0 to 1. So if you have a score close to 1, you have perfect cluster quality. If you have a score close to 0, you don't have good cluster quality. So I'll discuss some experimental evaluation now. So in the graph that you should see, there is time taken on the y-axis and samples in millions actually on the x-axis. So I've done an evaluation from 1 million to goes up to 10 million, and you see blue bar and then green and and then red. So hack T is represented by the blue bar. As you can see that the compute time is considerably less for 2-stage and then even less for 3-stage. So we can cluster 1 million samples in just 1 minute using 3-stage clustering, and 2 million in less than 2 minutes, and 4 million in approximately 4 minutes, and 10 million in about 14 minutes. So note that there's a speed of 9 to 12 times as compared to our previous approach, which did not make use of stage clustering. So one other important criteria for evaluating cluster usefulness is the number of items actually clustered. So as you can see here again, that both 2-stage and 3-stage clustering produce clusterings where a similar number of items are actually clustered. I note that the time taken is far less for 2-stage and 3-stage clustering, but the number of items clustered are almost similar. So next up, so as I explained purity score earlier, so here in this table, there is an evaluation based on the purity score. So here I actually make use of the labels from the 5 AV vendors. So those were extracted from VirusTotal data feed. So I varied data size from 1 million to 10 million. And what I saw was there's almost similar cluster quality for the 3 clustering algorithms analyzed for HACT, 2-stage clustering, and 3-stage clustering. So what that means is that using 2-stage and 3-stage clustering, you can run the clustering in it gives a 9 to 12x speed up. At the same time, your cluster quality is not affected by that much. And similarly, the number of items clustered, they're also very similar. So now I'll talk more about the choice of parameters. So there are a couple of parameters which are utilized. So the parameter T, this actually comes from the HACT clustering algorithm. So I make a choice as T is equal to 50, and this max iterations and K, these are related to the K-means. Max iteration is set as 10 and K is set as 100. And later on, I will discuss more like why I'm choosing K is equal to 100. So in this table, I do a kind of an experimental evaluation on like what I should choose as a suitable value for T. So note that when I vary T from 20 to 100, there are some trade-offs involved. Like the percentage noise, it decreases, but so is the average purity score. What that means is that when you increase the value of T, you can, because the percentage noise decreases, that means you can cluster more items. But there's a cost associated with that. And that is that your average purity score decreases. That means your cluster quality decreases. So ideally, you want to cluster as many items as possible and also have good cluster quality. But we need to make some trade-offs based on this results that we obtain. So I chose T is equal to 50 as a trade-off between those two desirable metrics. So next up, I'll explain why I chose K is equal to 100. Well, in general, K can be used to choose good range of values for the number of machines utilized. So what that means is that choosing some values of K yields will save you on compute time and also save you on the dollar cost that you spend utilizing resources on the cloud. So in order to make that point, I make use of two evaluation metrics for measuring effect of T on time taken to cluster items. So number one is job completion times. Job completion time you can think of as the latency associated with the clustering job, from job start to, to the time where the last cluster has been fully executed. So that's the job completion time. So total, on the other hand, total time is the time taken by all the machines while executing clustering job. So total time you can think of it as proportional to the dollar cost, like how many dollars you actually spent on the cloud, because the machines on the cloud, the way they are structured is that the way the dollar cost is calculated is that it's computed by per use. So the more time you utilize on the cloud, the more dollar is spent there. So a couple of graphs here: choice of K versus job completion time, total time. So total time is the blue graph here, and job completion time is the orange graph here. So what this means is that as first we will vary increasing K. So what happens first is that both total time and job completion time decrease in first, but then this either remain the same or they increase. So we see this pattern for all of the samples that are utilized from 500K to 4 million. So what that means is that there is a good range of values for K, beyond which you see no further advantage. In fact, if you increase the value of K here, you'll just end up utilizing more resources, and it still does not decrease the latency. So that explains why a good range for K is like between, I would say, 50 to 100. So by making use of that choice, you are optimizing on the resources utilized. So in conclusion, paper based on this work actually recently got accepted IEEE ISI, which is Intelligence and Security Informatics. This is joint work with Josiah Hagan and Jonathan Oliver. In recap, it provides a 9 to 12x speed up over existing methods. And the important thing is without compromising on cluster quality. It basically provides an architecture for scaling, because it allows for easy parallelization by making use of two-stage clustering and three-stage clustering, where in the second and third stage, you can make use of parallelization. Basically, it's the power of parallelization, which I exploit. So thank you very much, and please feel free to email me questions. So my email address is listed here. Thank you very much.